Now, the reason people like Nick Griffin and Jim Dowson turn their shows into gossip fests is because the only time people watch their shows are when they're gossip fests. On their tawdry little site, their Templar reports get a couple of hundred views. The only show they've ever had that's had reasonable views is when they talk about us. And that tells you everything you need to know. To get any form of traction, they have to be talking about us. When they talk about their own ideas, when they talk about their own projects, when they talk about their own ideology, when they're shilling their swords and capes, no one's listening. People are only listening when they're talking about us, because we're actually building a community. We have a sizable following. They don't. Their motivations aren't good, and Nick Griffin is a liar. And the questions that I'll be fielding tonight will prove that he is a liar. Now, the first thing I'm going to say about what Nick Griffin said is you will note that during the whole 2 hours of him looking rather red-faced, looking like a blowhard, looking like he was about to have a heart attack as he spluttered his way through these scandalous accusations, is that he never once presented a shred of evidence. Now, the allegations may have been serious, but they were never substantial. A substantial allegation is something that is backed up with some form of court document, some form of press report, some form of evidence. You need evidence to make an accusation substantial. But what this man deals in is he deals in lies, he deals in misinformation, and he deals in gossip. And he hopes that the more slanderous, the more salacious a rumor is, the further it will travel. But he never backs these up with any evidence. So people are going to say, firstly, why don't you take him to court? Why don't you sue him? Well, Nick, why don't you sue him? And the reason Charlie, can you mute this guy?
Sorry, mate, just missed him. Go on, pal.
People say, why don't you sue him? Why don't I sue him? Well, the reason you don't sue somebody like Nick Griffin is because Nick Griffin is a complete financial basket case. Nick Griffin is a man who has been bankrupted not once, but twice. That tells you a lot about him as a person and about the way he handles money. He was bankrupted in the 1980s. He will claim that he was the victim of a bad economy, property prices dipping. He wasted his money. People around him at the time know that. People around him then know he blew a lot of money on silly things and ended up in the hole. He did the same again when he was the leader of the BNP, and he ended up going bankrupt in 2014. Now, if you're bankrupted once, you are automatically struck off the bankruptcy register after a single year. If you are bankrupted a second time, you are what certain solicitors call a life bankruptcy, because you are not immediately struck off. You have to apply to the court to be struck off because it is seen as much more serious the second time around. Now, why was Nick Griffin struck off why was Nick Griffin bankrupted the second time? Well, I'll tell you. Nick Griffin was in charge of the British National Party. The British National Party was constituted as an unincorporated association. An unincorporated association is a group whose members or office holders are liable for debts and mistakes that organization has made. That organization, the British National Party, under Nick Griffin as leader, and the leader has to take the blame for this, got itself into hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of debt, hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of debt with printers, suppliers, solicitors, and this was what Griffin did. They were his choices. Just like when you watch a football team, if the players aren't scoring, if they're not playing well together, if you're seeing the wrong players on the pitch in the wrong position, that's the manager's fault. The manager takes the blame. Griffin was the leader, and the party was run with him having executive control over every part of the party. No one else did. It was his choice. It wasn't run by committee. It wasn't run by democracy. It wasn't one member, one vote on big issues. He always had executive control over everything. And when the party started getting taken to court, because he was the chairman and it was an unincorporated association, eventually people started suing him. He went down because of bad decisions. He took the British National Party down with him, and the party ended up in hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of debt. Now, straight away, I said earlier that he presents slanderous accusations without a shred of evidence. And I am going to give you evidence tonight. So I could quite easily say here, look, at the end of the day, you could speak to anyone from the British National Party from that era, but I'm better than that. So the first thing I'm going to do, and it's going in the speaker chat now. So if you are watching the live chat, I'm going to present a news article. This one is from The Guardian, and it talks about his bankruptcy. It tells you how much he owed, which solicitors took him to court. That is a factual piece of evidence from the time that you can look up now, and you can follow all the breadcrumbs and learn more about it yourself. So he isn't somebody who you can take to court and sue because he is a twice bankrupt. He was discharged from his last bankruptcy sometime in 2017. So he's had maybe 4 years now of not being bankrupt. I should assume that most of his wealth before he went bankrupt was transferred into his wife's name. There would be pointless suing him. Now, people say, why didn't you go to the police? I'm not going to the police. I'm not a grass. I have never gone running to the police about anything. I'm not about to start doing so now. And the fact of the matter is, if I went to the police, it would be over malicious communication, but I am not going to do that. Because as soon as I did that, all of these ridiculous people like Liam, who I spoke of earlier, total bad egg, he would then call me a grass. So the guy's basically unsuable. And also, I am not going to go to the police. It would be pointless. But I have presented evidence as to why I am making those decisions. I've presented evidence about his financial idiocy and the fact he has been twice bankrupt. If you Google his bankruptcies, you will find more information about it, and there will be information on different public bodies, different courts that deal with bankruptcies. You can find all of those things out. Now, what is the first and most salacious rumor that Nick Griffin spreads about Patriotic Alternative and people within Patriotic Alternative? Well, interestingly, the most salacious rumor is actually the easiest one to completely bat away. Nick Griffin has on multiple occasions claimed that Kenny Smith from Scotland and Steve Blake were the ones responsible for leaking the British National Party membership list. That is a very serious accusation, and he is now saying that was the greatest dox of all time. Kenny Smith was behind it. Steve Blake were behind it. Mark is giving Kenny executive powers in PA. It's all going to happen again. And by extension, he's saying, I am letting these two bad eggs do this. This is completely untrue. And it can be proved as untrue with a simple Google search. You do not need to take my word for it. You can Google this, a simple Google search, and I am going to do that Google search now, and I'm going to pop this in the chat. If you put BNP membership list, Matt Single into Google, lots of different results are returned, and I'm going to read the top one. This is from The Guardian. This article is more than 12 years old. Ex-BNP man fined for leaking details of thousands of party members. Matthew Single posted lists of names on blog in 2008. Police disappointed with £200 fine in £50,000 case. A former member of the British National Party was fined £200 today after he admitted leaking the names and details of thousands of party members. Matthew Single appeared before Nottingham magistrates, admitting revealing the names, addresses and occupations of around 12,000 members. Charges against his wife, Sadie Graham Single, were dropped. District Judge John Stobart ordered 37-year-old Single to pay an additional £100 towards the costs of the prosecution. Anything that is posted on the internet has the effect of opening a Pandora's box, he said. Now, I am not going to read the rest of the article. There are multiple articles on this, and I'm going to post it in the speaker chat now, the particular article I have read. Now, Kenny Smith did indeed at one point have a membership list. He was admin officer. He was never arrested. He was never contacted by the police. He was certainly never charged. He was never taken to court. Suspicion was never, ever on him. He had nothing to do with it. The file was leaked from an address in Nottingham. The police found that out. They discovered the people living at that address were Matt Single and Sadie Graham. Sadie Graham had the membership list. Why did Sadie Graham have the membership list? Well, Nick Griffin appointed Sadie Graham as what was known as Group Development Officer, head of Group Development. She had one of the most powerful positions in the party, which he picked her to take on. He selected her. So again, football manager analogy, if the manager picks bad players that don't do their job, who gets sacked? The manager. Griffin never got sacked. Griffin carried on regardless, despite the fact he is the only leader in the history of British nationalism who has been in charge of a party where its membership leaked like that. He gave the membership list to Sadie Graham. Sadie Graham and Matt Single were both arrested because the police traced where the file had been uploaded from. Quite easy to do. They knew where it had been uploaded from. They went to the house. They took the computers. Both of them were initially charged for doing it as a couple, but eventually Sadie had the charges dropped against her. Matt was found guilty in court. Matt Single has a criminal record for doing this. You can find that all out. Kenny Smith had a membership list. He was head of admin. He was never arrested, never spoken to by the police. And why Nick Griffin brought Steve Blake into this, I do know, because Nick Griffin is a very silly, spiteful, horrid man. So he brought another good nationalist name into it. But Steve Blake never had a membership list. He was in charge of the BNP's website. And again, he was never even contacted by the police over this membership leak. You can find all of this out. There's so many links online, and there will be court documents that you can obtain if you really wish. All of that can be found out. So what I have done here, I have not only completely debunked everything that Nick Griffin has said about Kenny Smith and Steve Blake, but I've done something that Nick Griffin hasn't done. I have presented actual evidence that you guys can follow up if you have any lingering doubts. Myself and everybody involved in Patriotic Alternative takes data protection very, very seriously. There is no way any right-thinking nationalist would ever have anything to do with Matt Single or Sadie Graham again after what they did. They have nothing to do with PA. I should imagine they went back to normie life after doing that. But Kenny Smith and Steve Blake were never even contacted by the police. And the fact Nick Griffin is making out they did that and were involved in that leak tells you just how low he will stoop. And the fact he can present no evidence, none at all, to link these people to it, tells you exactly what he is up to.
So basically, he's just charging us with a load of nonsense that he can't prove, and he's trying to throw as much. He's trying to muddy the waters as much as he can and accuse PA of all manner of ridiculous stuff that he can't prove. It's
exactly
ridiculous.
Now, another thing that Nick Griffin does is he makes accusations at others which are little more than reflections of his own dark, twisted personality. One thing he said about me during the 2-hour tirade, and I'm not going to go through each point blow by blow, but he tried, and he has been trying to do this for several weeks because he never stops talking about me. You'll notice if you look at my Telegram page, if you look at my Gab page, I don't talk about him. The only time he ever gets mentioned is when people ask via Super Chat, and I always pledge to read the Super Chats and reply to them honestly. So I do that. The only time I ever mention him is if somebody Super Chats me. But during this 2-hour tirade of nonsense. He tried to make out some sexual innuendos about me. And over the last couple of weeks, he's been saying that I am soft on the issue of homosexuality, that he's the man who's tough on that. He wouldn't tolerate any homosexuals whatsoever. Well, that's a really interesting statement from Nick Griffin, because Nick Griffin has been repeatedly dogged by rumors and allegations of homosexual relationships with a man called Martin Webster. Again, you can Google that. You can find them online. Now, in Griffin's favor, he has always said they are not true. He said that he never had sexual relations with that man, but Nick Griffin, who comes from a very wealthy family, and Martin Webster, who was a very, very wealthy man and had an awful lot of money because he was left a very large bequest from Lady Jane Birchwood, he did not ever sue him. He never sued him for that. But let's say he didn't have the money to sue him, but those allegations exist and you can look them up. Martin Webster, a prominent member of the National Front, accused Nick Griffin of this. Now, Nick Griffin now also claims to be this good Christian. He claims to be a man of morality. He claims that he spent his whole life fighting for morality and traditionalism. Well, let's have a look at those particular claims, because those claims are very, very interesting. And again, let's read from newspapers at the time. Let's see the kind of people that Nick Griffin associated with and brought into the BNP, because I think it's very, very important that we look again at facts. Now, this is one of the first items I will bring to your attention, and I'm going to drop it in the speaker chat now so you can all have a look. It is from a blog called the Final Conflict blog, and I'm going to read the headline to you all now. And this is a headline, not from the blog itself, but from a newspaper. And there's an actual scan of the newspaper. And I'm going to read the newspaper headline. BNP chief's wife is granny porn star. Yes, you heard that right. BNP chief's wife is a granny porn star. So Nick Griffin had numerous people who were close to him. Nick Griffin had a particular man called Ian Kitchen on his security team. He attended Ian Kitchen's wedding to the woman in question. The woman in question was involved in the production of what is known as granny porn. And although I have no personal expertise in that particular field, I can imagine it's as horrific as it sounds. And what was Nick Griffin's response to finding out one of his personal security retinue and a man whose wedding he'd attended was involved with a granny porn star? Well, I quote, he said it was a private matter. A private matter. And he later made that man the Yorkshire and Humberside BNP regional organizer. Nick Griffin appointed a man to one of the most important roles in the party, a regional organizer. And Yorkshire was a region that had an MEP. So it was one of the two most productive regions in the country when it came to elections. Yet he made this man who was with a granny porn star a regional organizer. Now you might think, oh, well, Mark, that might just have been some error of judgment. That might just be some error of judgment. Well, I'm going to share an article with you now, which is from the Daily Mirror. And again, I'm going to drop it into the speaker chat so you can all see that it's real. Top BNP aide is sleazy swinger. Now, Nick Griffin's closest ally in the British National Party was a man called Martin Reynolds. He was a large steroid-using bodybuilder who was Griffin's personal security guard. He drove him everywhere. They shared hotel rooms together. Now, Martin Reynolds, who escorted him everywhere, and Nick Griffin, who preaches family values, this is from the article. By night, Reynolds, 37, revels in debauched threesomes with his wife and another woman as pictures obtained by the People show. The photos involve the married dad of 3 have caused a huge rift in the BNP. In one photograph, Reynolds watches a tattoo and pierced dark-haired woman with a black leather corset using a toy to perform a sex act on the other woman. The lusting BNP fanatic then kneels behind her to get a better view of the sordid action. Next, the flabby pervert sits on a grotty brown sofa and stares down as a woman wearing a negligee is pleasured by both herself and the other woman. In another photo, too obscene to publish, he sprawls on the floor pleasuring himself and gawping as the 2 women romp. Finally, he grabs hold of the dark-haired woman and poses for a photo as he involves himself in the group sex. Now, people at the time were very annoyed with Nick Griffin over this and said, we're meant to be a party of family values. This is a married man. He's got 3 children. Nick Griffin kept him on till the bitter end. He remained as Nick Griffin's closest confidant, bodyguard, personal escort until the bitter end. Now you're thinking, well, this just might be two random occurrences. You can't judge the man solely on this. But we have more, and it actually gets worse. Nick Griffin's choice for London regional organiser was a man named Steve Squire, and I'm posting a link here in the chat. You can look this up as well. And this is a slightly more serious link. And why do I say that? It is an article, it is a link to an old article, sex shops sell banned date rape drug for £15. Well, this is about a sex shop in London that was selling GHB, a banned date rape drug. Well, what does that have to do with Nick Griffin? Well, the sex shop in question that was selling the banned date rape drug was owned by one Steve Squire, the BNP's London organiser. Nick Griffin, again, stood by the man despite this rather unwholesome allegation. And it's not just an allegation, because if you look it up, you actually see that the press at the time had gone into the sex shop. They've got undercover footage of people obtaining GHB over the counter there. But even without the GHB, you've still got a very, very serious problem that Nick Griffin appointed a man who made his living from running a sex shop. Now, this is all decisions, or these are all decisions made by a man who now claims to be a traditionalist, a Christian, a Knights Templar. The fact of the matter is, Nick Griffin is pulling your leg. If you believe this is some moral Knights Templar, he's not. But there is one final article. And this article is probably even more embarrassing for him. And again, I'm going to put it in the speaker chat. And I said I'd come with evidence. Here we go. BNP leader Nick Griffin is a sex pest who exposed himself to former glamour model in her car. So what's this? And again, this accusation was made in 2012. Now, in 2012, Nick Griffin was an MEP. MEPs, including all their travel expenses, office expenses, wages, and everything they're entitled to from the European Parliament, in total, expenses and wages get around £180,000 per year. So if Nick Griffin tells you that he couldn't afford to sue, if Nick Griffin tells you he couldn't have taken the paper to court, he's lying. If Nick Griffin tells you he couldn't have taken the woman to court who made the accusations, he's also lying, because the woman who made the accusation owned her own home. But I'm going to read this article to you just for completion. Nick Griffin, a married father of 4, has portrayed himself as a family man to clean up the party's reputation. Claudia Dalgleish says he wrote in a text to her, "It is hot in France, so you don't need to wear very much." Claudia, let's let's get into the actual article itself. BNP leader Nick Griffin is a sex pest who exposed himself to a former glamour model in her car, it was claimed today. Claudia Dalglish said the far-right leader bombarded her with text messages full of crude sexual innuendos during a campaign of harassment. The 40-year-old said that Mr. Griffin flashed at her after they ate a takeaway together in her vehicle. Classy as ever as well, guys. Classy as ever. There's nothing like exposing yourself in the car park of a dirty kebab house, is there? Claudia, also known as Claudia Bryan, told the Daily Mail and the Sunday Star that the married father of four pulled his trousers down after they finished the meal. She got out of her Jeep to throw away the rubbish to find the leader had partially undressed himself. I came back and found Nick Griffin with his trousers down by his knees. I was shocked and asked him what he was doing, she said. I was disgusted. He was excited. I ordered him out of the car. He is a sex pest. Claudia and Mr. Griffin were parked in a car park in Swanley, Kent, after she crossed the English Channel to fetch him from France, where he was involved in a car crash. Nick Griffin, who has a wife called Jackie, has portrayed himself as a family man. She claimed that Mr. Griffin, 52, also sent her a series of sexually explicit text messages. Claudia, who now runs a model agency, wrote on her blog, the BNP leader sent her a message which said, "Do you know the French side of the tunnel? And be aware, it's very hot over here, so you don't need to wear very much." In another crude message, he allegedly said, "That's a given, as is checking that your legs feel as silky as they look." And the article goes on. So, again, this is evidence. I have placed this in the chat. People can have a look at it. And this is a guy who is claiming that everybody is a sexual degenerate, that PA are terrible because we said we wouldn't put cameras in everybody's bedrooms and check up on what they're doing. This is the man who's telling you he's all about family values. This is the Christian Templar. You know, this is the guy walking around Europe in his cape trying to pretend he's a brave Christian. He is not. This man has more baggage than you can possibly imagine. Now, I said something earlier about the way Nick Griffin and PA detractors behave. If there was this amount of evidence against anybody in PA, Nick Griffin, people like that silly Liam who works for the state, they would all be talking about this day and night. They'd be saying nationalism needs to be a movement of traditionalism. It needs to be a movement of Christianity. It needs to be a movement of family values. But do you think any of those people are going to pull up Knights Templar and Nick Griffin on this? Of course they're not. Of course they're not. And somebody said in the chat, why does the article about the sex shop owner call the guy Steve Mendoza? That's because Steve Mendoza was his real name. He then changed it to Squire to hide his past or his ethnicity or something. I'm not sure why he changed his name, but that is why the name in the article is different. So that lets you know a little bit about Nick Griffin. But what you will find out here is things go a little deeper, because Nick Griffin also likes to tell everyone about how bad everyone else is with finances and how other people take money, they grift, they damage their members by wasting money, etc. And they're just all round terrible people. Well, let's analyze another little article. Again, this is from the Belfast Telegraph, and the link is in the chat. So I'm going to read you this. This is about Nick Griffin's financial decisions that wrecked numerous British businesses. BNP faces court over bills. The British National Party owes companies in Northern Ireland hundreds of thousands of pounds in unpaid bills, it is claimed. The Belfast Telegraph can reveal that a number of firms here could take the party to court for monies outstanding. One former supporter of the party has warned that small family-run firms could go bankrupt because of the shortfall, thought to total over £500,000. That is an underestimation. At the height of the BNP's debts, which were thanks to Nick Griffin's poor management, the BNP owed over £600,000. A case has already been heard in the High Court in March involving the non-payment of election expenses relating to the Barking constituency in London, where the party leader Nick Griffin was the candidate. A company called Newton Press has taken legal action over an outstanding bill of more than £10,000 for printing services. So this is a man who talks about morality. Well, if you owe a printer, a family-run printer, £10,000, you don't stiff them because that destroys the business. Eventually, the businesses in Belfast that he owed money to went under. People lost their businesses. People's families suffered because of his poor management. Again, I'll read further. Last week, the BNP pledged to pay off all the money it owed by the end of the year, adding that the debts were a result of spending during the last European and general election campaigns. This is interesting, though, this next bit, because somebody that you may know pops up. A former BNP supporter in Northern Ireland who is also owed money said he is not confident of being repaid soon. Jim Dowson is a fundraiser who helps set up BNP offices all over the UK, including in Northern Ireland. His firm, Ad Lorries, which provides promotional and marketing services, claims he is owed around 160,000. Jim Dowson said he has already had to dip into his own cash to pay off smaller companies related to his firm who were left out of pocket. Now, this is a direct quote from Jim Dowson in the Belfast Telegraph, and this was published on the 3rd of May, 2011. The BNP claim to be the saviours of British industry and British workers, but I am afraid that around half a dozen small family-run businesses, including some in Northern Ireland, could go to the wall because the BNP have not paid them, he said. We are in a recession and times are hard enough as it is. People have been treated disgracefully. Mr. Dowson also expressed anger that party boss Mr. Griffin was spotted walking around East Belfast last week, just yards from a firm the BNP allegedly owes more than £40,000 to. David Sloan from small family firm Romac Press in East Belfast says his company is owed £44,000. He has defended his firm taking business from the right-wing group, saying that the UK is in a deep recession. We are not in a position to turn people away, but the BNP has basically wiped out a year's profits, he said. I have contacted police, the Electoral Commission, and I'll take it to the High Court if I have to. So there you have it. Small businesses suffering at his hands. But again, Nick Griffin likes to talk a lot about other people's finances without offering any form of evidence. Yet again, I have offered you evidence, and I have even offered you testimony given to the newspaper from Nick Griffin's partner in Knights Templars, Jim Dowson. And let's talk a little about Jim Dowson, because Nick Griffin loves to talk about people working with the state. Nick Griffin loves to talk about people who work with agencies that are anti-nationalist. Well, this is really interesting because Jim Dowson actually did an interview with Hope Not Hate. Jim Dowson actually went to Hope Not Hate. They've now removed the article, but I'm posting the web archive in the chat. He went to Hope Not Hate.
Mark, sorry, can I stop you very quickly? Why I'm not sure you'd know, but why would Hope Not Hate remove the article?
I think that's very hard to say exactly why Hope Not Hate removed the article. I'm sure they've updated their website since then. I'm sure there are broken links, but it could be something more nefarious. They could be trying to. They could have done somebody could have done a deal in the background. How do we know? I like to stick to facts and not conjecture, and that would be conjecture to say. But
the only way that article can be viewed now is with the Wayback Machine.
Oh yeah, but I've posted that, and we can always post screenshots if people want. This is a quote from Jim Dowson. Waving goodbye to the far right. That's the name of the article. And I'm obviously winding somebody up tonight because I have a private number that is incessantly calling me. So obviously this is upsetting someone. Last month, Jim Dowson walked out on Britain First in an exclusive interview with Matthew Collins and Nick Lowles. He explains why he's turning his back on Britain's far right. Now, this is a long article. It's a long article, so I'm not going to read it all. People can read it at their own leisure. But I'll read some choice bits. Shocked by Dowson's very public resignation, Britain First promised they would stop invading mosques as Dowson had requested. Then, stung by the interview he gave the Daily Mirror and then his own recorded farewell, Golding led his followers straight back to another mosque. You know, Griffin warned me that boy Golding would get me into trouble, said Dowson. So very interesting there that he didn't just go to the Hope Not Hate, he also went to the Daily Mirror. Then he says some other things. Dowson continues, and this is a quote from Dowson. When I quit the BNP, they dreamt up sex scandals, the usual stuff they dream up, or money. They're Griffin. There, and in brackets, Griffin's other obsession. When people question whether you are behaving or acting like a proper Christian and your own community call that into question, you have to take stock. I was sitting at home with my kids watching Golding and Co. intimidating this little old man in his mosque in Crayford, Kent, and I knew it was not right. You did not have to tell me that. I'm a man of faith. It has driven me in many directions that people like you do not approve of, but I have always managed to maintain my Christian principles, and that was unholy Christian and against everything I thought I had taught them. You're saying it also had racial undertones. To me, that was never the intention of Britain First, and it has some non-white members, you know. So I kept telling them all, get down to one of those black churches where they embrace Christianity, learn something of what we're about. That's a direct quote from Jim Dowson. Get down to one of those black churches where they embrace Christianity and learn something of what we're all about. But they're really no different from the BNP. And for that, I have myself to blame for thinking the English had anything left in them. He goes on, in the BNP in particular, there is a recurring theme about rebirthing the English, that and anti-Zionism appealed to Dowson. There are some, and then Dowson says, there are some very good people in Britain First, Christian folk, I convinced to join because we believe in the Bible. And then he has this to say about Nick Griffin. Nick Griffin, this is a quote from Jim Dowson on Hope Not Hate's website, the article that's been removed. Nick Griffin just hated Jews. Believe what you want about me, but I have never known hatred like what the BNP has for Jews. Well, you can read the rest at your own leisure, but it's very interesting that this moral crusader, Nick Griffin, this man whose history is marred with financial scandals, with sex scandals, with who's now lying through his teeth about good nationalists. Nick Griffin's now working with Jim Dowson, a man that went to Hope Not Hate about him. So I'll let you draw your own conclusions as to what kind of relationship that is. Now, Charlie, do you have any questions about this?
Where to start? Just for a quick one for anybody listening. I think you went a little bit into it at the start, Mark, but the reason that we're doing this and the reason that we're going over this subject matter is because of the accusations that Nick, Jim, and I think it was Jada as well were leveling at PA, and it was just basically smears and ridiculous accusations, and it turns out that Nick himself is guilty of, well, everything and more that they've thrown at PA. I don't think there's a single thing that they said that was true, and this is just us clearing the air, basically, and airing all their dirty laundry and letting people know what they're about. And it's not, I don't want this to get into like an us and them, like, oh, he said, she said, but that's why Mark's not doing it on PWR or any of the main channels. These people only exist on Telegram, really. I mean, what did Griffin get on his last show? I think it was 120. Was it people watching? If you start addressing these people on Mark's platform, you're breathing life into them. Do you know what I mean? So that's why it's getting done here for people who are asking in the chat. They're not important enough to address in a true manner. They don't require it. But there has been a couple of people requesting, Mark, you're going to address what's been levelled, and here it is. So for anybody asking, that's the reason it's getting done.
Yeah, and the big one was obviously the accusations about Kenny Smith, which we've completely debunked. And just for anyone who's arriving late, every accusation I've debunked or everything that I've talked about tonight is backed up with press reports or court reports. Now, another thing that Nick Griffin says about me, which is really interesting, is he said he sacked me from the party. Now, Nick Griffin didn't sack me from the party. That's complete nonsense. Nick Griffin actually did not sack me. In fact, when I left the party in September of 2010, I left with a letter of commendation from the party manager, Adam Walker, with the party actually owing me £16,000 for office rent and wages they hadn't been paying me. They failed to meet the payment schedule, the very generous payment schedule they signed. I allowed them to sign up to. I said, look, don't give me the £16,000 all at once. Pay it back in an initial instalment of £2,000, another instalment of £2,000 in a month, and then £1,000 per month thereon until the debt is cleared. They paid the first £2,000 and they never paid another instalment. Now, in the end, I pursued them in court, and in court, I beat them. And the BNP were ordered to pay not only the money they owed me, but interest on the money that they owed me, all court costs, and all my solicitors' costs. This is a matter of public record. This is a matter of public record. It was in County Durham Court. You can find this out. It's very easy to find out the firm of solicitors that represented me. The solicitor that did most of the work is a very good friend of mine. And the person who represented the BNP in court was Adam Walker. And Nick Griffin, in a very, very cowardly manner, even when the court ordered that they owed the money in full, Nick Griffin did not meet the payment schedule. He did not actually do what the court had ordered him to. And in the end, that resulted in Nick Griffin's party manager, Adam Walker, getting a charging order placed on his house because of debts accrued in the party name. So again, Nick Griffin caught out lying. I was not sacked. I left the party by mutual agreement. I have a letter somewhere. I don't know if I can find it. It's in a box somewhere in the attic. And I'll be honest, I'm not going through all the boxes in the attic, but I have a letter somewhere, and it was proved in court that the party had agreed to pay me a substantial sum, £16,000 in total. This wasn't money that was a payoff. This wasn't a golden handshake. This was money they owed me in wages that they hadn't paid and expenses they hadn't met because I was renting an office in my own name on their behalf. Their party manager and their head of HR at the time, a guy called Patrick Harrington, agreed to all this. The payments weren't made. Again, Nick Griffin is lying through his teeth. And this was another sizable debt that the party at the time could have avoided, but didn't avoid because they weren't servicing debts. And the court dealt with it. And this time, it wasn't Nick Griffin whose head was on the chopping block. He let one of his loyal lieutenants be dragged through the court and end up with a charging order against his home because of debts that Griffin hadn't serviced. Now, the interesting thing about this is eventually people like Adam Walker turned on Nick Griffin, threw him out of the party, and took the party over themselves. Can you wonder why?
Mark, when me and you first started speaking a few years back now, I asked about Nick. I don't know if you remember. I said here, like my impression of him was that he was some old nationalist head, and I knew he had fell out. But I was like, how's Nick and blah blah blah. I didn't know the lay of the land, and I just thought that he was an old nationalist. Maybe he had fell out, but was he still deserving of respect? But I found out subsequently that one of the reasons of the downfall of the BNP was that Nick kicked out what he termed nutsies, which is a play on words for National Socialist or nutcases. So basically, he's conflating the two terms. At first, I really didn't want to believe it, because I've seen videos of Nick doing, speaking in the EU Parliament, and I thought, wow, this guy's great. But it seems the more that I learned about him at the time, it was just like, it shattered all my illusions of the man, and everything from then is just like, I almost feel sorry for the guy because he's become something of a joke. It's like now he can't just crack on with his own stuff in his own party. It all has to be centered around PA and trying to damage PA and do shows about PA and talk about PA and what's PA doing. You know, can we do a show about this? It's honestly pathetic. But just for anybody that may not know, when Nick kicked out the people who he called Nazis, would you say that was one of the fundamental reasons of the downfall of the BNP, or was it other external?
Nick Griffin kicked out anyone who posed a threat to him. Nick Griffin was absolutely paranoid because he's not a man who is of the highest caliber. The BNP did very well between 2000 and 2010 because there were lots and lots of talented people in the British National Party working very hard. Now, another thing that Nick Griffin likes to say is that actually he is some kind of wonder man who does all these amazing things, who brings people together, and that here in PA we are the kind of group that expels people. Now, granted, over the couple of years that PA has been in existence, some people have come and some people have left. We have had the odd small spat. Now, as far as I can remember, there are only really a handful of content creators that we've parted ways with, and that happens. That happens. But I wouldn't call any of those content creators, I'm not being derogatory about them, but I wouldn't call any of them titans of the nationalist movement. I wouldn't liken those people to the likes of, shall we say, John Tyndall, the man who formed the BNP. I wouldn't liken them to Richard Edmonds, a great lifelong nationalist who used to run the BNP's bookshop, was in the National Front before it, and spent his life working for nationalism. I wouldn't liken them to Richard Edmonds. I wouldn't liken those people that we've parted company with to Jonathan Bowden, possibly the greatest nationalist orator to ever come out of post-war Britain. I wouldn't liken those people to Arthur Kemp, who was, again, a great author and a great speaker, or to Andrew Bronze, a BNP MEP. So why did I mention Nick Griffin? Oh, sorry. Why did I mention John Tyndall? Why did I mention Richard Edmonds? Why did I mention Jonathan Bowden and Arthur Kemp? Why am I mentioning these particular people? Why did I mention BNP MEP Andrew Bronze? Because Nick Griffin kicked all those people out. Now, there'll be many people in the chat tonight who absolutely love the works of Jonathan Bowden and Arthur Kemp. Nick Griffin got rid of them. There'll be people here who have a lifelong respect for John Tyndall, once the chairman of the National Front. He was the chairman of the National Front at its height. He was also the man who founded the British National Party and led it from its formation until 1999. Nick Griffin kicked John Tyndall out of the party. That is very, very condemning. He kicked out the BNP's other MEP. He kicked out Richard Barnbrook, the BNP's GLA member, and he kicked out a whole host of other people. Now, I don't see eye to eye with all the people he kicked out, but there's a lot of them. He didn't kick me out. As I said, that got settled in a very amicable way until I had to take him to court to get him to keep his word. But he kicked out Eddie Butler. I didn't get on with Eddie Butler, but he's a talented man when it comes to electioneering. He kicked out Chris Beverley. Chris Beverley was the man who was the mastermind behind the successful Yorkshire MEP campaign that got Andrew Bronze elected. He kicked out Emma Colgate, the one-time party manager. And there's a number of other people, Kenny Smith, Steve Blake, they're on board with us now. And I speak to dozens and dozens and dozens of ex-BNP members. We have dozens of ex-BNP members who help PA, who come to our conferences, who attend our meetings, who've got in touch with us locally. Why are they with us and not with him? Because people who were around at the time despise Nick Griffin. The reason Nick Griffin isn't leader of the British National Party now is because Nick Griffin expelled all of the talented people. He branded them nutsies and cranks. And then when he'd got rid of all of them, he was in a cesspit of a party that collapsed and collapsed and collapsed further and further. He was surrounded by rogues that he'd appointed. And when things took a turn for the worst after the European elections in 2014, where Griffin's vote was derisory, absolutely stomped, Griffin got stomped. I'll talk about that in a second. But after that, they all turned on him and got rid of him. Nick Griffin was expelled from the BNP, and Google it if you don't believe me. In fact, I'm going to Google it now and place it in the chat. Nick Griffin expelled. Let's see. Here is an article, the top ones from the BBC. Nick Griffin expelled by BNP. So there is the man that tries to claim he was loved by everyone in the BNP. They all adored him. Eventually, they expelled him because he'd caused so much trouble. They got rid of him. He didn't walk away. He was kicked out on his ear. And if you look at the British National Party's MEP results, now I'm going to see if I can find these online because this is going to be a bit of a search. So bear with me. I think we've got a few more minutes tonight. European elections 1999. And this will tell you exactly how far the BNP rose when there was talented people within the BNP, and how far it fell when Griffin had kicked all the talented people out post 2009, when it was completely devoid of all of the people who had actually built it up. So I'm going to take these are the results from Wikipedia. Now, in 1999, the BNP took 102,647 votes in the European elections nationally. In 2004, that share of the vote, when the party was packed with talented people, went up to 808,000. In 2009, sorry for the typing, guys, my microphone will pick that up, it'll be annoying. The BNP's vote went up even further, 943,598. Now, in 2014, if you go to European elections 2014, this was when Griffin got unseated, the party's votes dropped from, how far down the list is it? Let me just have a look. The party's votes dropped from 943,000 and something, whatever it was, to 179,693. They lost both their seats and they collapsed. Griffin's decision as a dictatorial madman post his election to the European Parliament was so bad, they almost took the party back to 1999 levels of support. So he had undone a decade's hard work in 5 years as an MEP. And the accumulation of all of those talented people being expelled was that result. And just to tell you who Nick Griffin replaced those talented people with, well, actually, there's no point telling you extensively, because I listed earlier Yorkshire Regional Organiser, a man who was a shadow of previous Yorkshire Regional Organisers, a man whose wife was involved in granny porn. He'd got rid of London Regional Organisers like Richard Barnbrook and Chris Roberts. He'd got rid of our one and only GLA member. He'd got rid of talented nationalists who'd been in the party for years. He'd got rid of people like Richard Edmonds, who lived in London, replacing them with a man who owned a pawn shop. His closest confidant was a man who attended swingers parties. Can you see now why the party's vote collapsed? But the most interesting appointment was a man called Clive Jefferson. Nick Griffin placed Clive Jefferson in charge of all of the party's funds. Now, at the time he placed Jefferson in charge of the party's funds, the party had a turnover of in excess of £1 million a year. So I know what you're thinking. This Clive Jefferson must have been a really talented financial whiz. He must have been an accountant. He must have worked for a big bank. Was he a civil servant? Did he have important big letters after his name? Where did he study? Where did he study finance and accountancy to be in charge of a party's finances that had a turnover of in excess of £1 million. Clive Jefferson was a bouncer. He was a bouncer that worked on the doors in nightclubs in Cumbria. A bouncer who had been involved in a drug trial, a large public drug trial that collapsed. That was the man that Nick Griffin placed in charge of the party's money. And Nick Griffin has the gall to start talking about other people's decisions. Who's in charge of this? Who's in charge of that? He'll ask without a hint of irony, because he's shameless. But Nick Griffin placed Clive Jefferson in charge of the party's finances. Now, if you want to look that up, again, Google yourself silly, because it's all there. It is all there. Now, when it comes down to it, the party later survived off bequests. And this again, can be found online. What was happening is Nick Griffin sent people round to the homes of pensioners who were members and asked them to leave their money to the party. And what is left of the BNP now still survives off bequests, because it was, in my opinion, look, I've got nothing against people leaving money to political parties if that's what they wish to do. If somebody came to PA and said, I'd like to leave PA my money when I pass away, I'd be very touched and I would humbly accept. But when you are sending people round to pensioners' homes, when a party is sending out its financial officers to the homes of pensioners who are members and attempting to convince them to leave their money to the party, I find that extremely distasteful.
So not much has changed really then where he's concerned, does it?
Well, that's the thing, Charlie, and I'm pleased you said that, because if you go on Nick Griffin's new website, Knights Templar International, what do you find? What do you find? Because there is somewhere, and I have seen it on here, a place where you can actually, it asks you to subscribe it's one of those horrible sites when you go on it, it asks you to subscribe like basically as many times as you click, it asks you to subscribe. But somewhere on this site there is there's an armory. Isn't that hilarious? There is an armory. The site actually has an armory. You can buy, one of the top links is Templar Armory Warrior Package, available with 3 monthly installments. I mean, how cringe is that? That sounds like something you'd see in the back of a Sunday supplement, doesn't it? You can buy this decorative plate, just 3 affordable monthly installments. The Lionheart Dagger, now available. Battle Helmet. I mean, it is cringy. But one thing they do, and I can't actually seem to find this on the page now. I mean, to join them is hilarious. To join them, it's $890, but you get like a bag of cheap tat that was made in China, like a robe, a silly badge, some gloves that look laughable. But there is something on there, and I can't seem to actually find it at the moment. It's actually a package that they offer for people who are dying. And that package claims that for nearly $1,200 plus fees for the shipping of the ashes, they will ensure people's ashes are interned in some holy Templar chapel everywhere. Oh, somewhere. I know where it is, and I don't believe it is a holy Templar chapel. It's been alleged to me that it's an outbuilding attached to one of their members' houses that they've renovated to look like a chapel, so people will believe they've got a chapel. I think things like that are disgusting. I think asking people to donate money for that kind of thing is absolutely shocking. And I am trying to find it because it is something which is pretty nasty. Let me just have a quick look. Here it is. I've actually found it. Let me read this to you. The Roll of Honor of the Glorious Dead, the Magdalene Chapel, St. Donard's Priory in Ireland. Now, it's been alleged that this building is an old outbuilding attached to Jim Dowson's house. We all die. That is how it is. And it is our blessed hope that in Christ Jesus we return to our Father in glory. However, mortal remains are another issue, and where we rest our weary bones can be a matter of grave concern. Many people are now cremated and their ashes scattered or quickly lost. Even graves are often neglected and forgotten. Sad, but all part of modern life. Therefore, the Templar Order has set aside one of our dedicated chapels to house the ashes of members who have departed this life, a sacred place where ancient Templar chants will ring out daily, 365 days a year, and where God shall be praised in worship without ceasing. That's a big claim, isn't it? That these things will ring out every day, and literally God will be praised without ceasing. This chapel of the glorious dead is truly unique. Its century-old walls are built of stones taken from a local Cistercian abbey, erected in 1199 to replace the small church built by St. Patrick himself. It goes on and on and on, but eventually it reaches the point. Your loved ones will be sent a large roll of honour scroll for framing with your name and rank and details of your birth and death dates, as well as the Magdalene Chapel address. This means that 100 years or more after your passing, your bloodline will know where to find your urn/granite box. You can also write a personal message to your descendants that will be entered into our Battalion of the Glorious Dead Great Book, which shall be kept in the St. Donard's chapter house adjacent to the chapel. And it goes on and on and on. And then it tells you the price. If you want a single member, it's $1,119. Member and spouse, $1,678. Family plot, only up to 4 though, $2,400. But wait a minute. Note, we have an arrangement with an international courier for conveying human ashes. Cost is approximately an additional $49. And it goes on and on and on. You can tell what this operation is. It is similar to the operation that was run with the British National Party. And when it comes down to it, this is not what nationalism is about. This is not an honest operation. I believe that this is coercive. I believe it is nasty. And I believe that, sadly, some very gullible people will be won over by this and will hand over their hard-earned cash, believing that their urn is going to some wonderful place, which I do not believe it is.
I mean, what are they charging there? Does it say on the website to get
ready?
Yeah.
It's $1,119 for a single plot, $2,400 for a family of 4.
So it's a live action role play of a recreation of the Templar Order. And what they're basically saying is that you have to pay money for Dowson to throw your ashes in the shed next to his fucking strimmer and his lawnmower.
That would certainly be a way of putting it. That would certainly be a way of putting it.
Wow. That's what I mean. There's Griffin, and then there's, promising people eternal rest in the chapel of the fucking the 5,000 Templars or whatever, which is actually just the outbuilding on Dowson's gaff or one of the big gaffs. I mean, that's beyond Griffin. That's despicable, unreal.